Welcome everybody to the Central Region MUFON monthly meeting. We are doing this one Saturday a month, as much as possible, hopefully every month. I'm the Central Region Director, Margie Kay, and I know there are a lot of new people here. I did just boot someone off. If you have a question about that, just send me a private email to MUFON Central Region dir@gmail.com, and I will explain that. In the meantime, we will have our guest speaker, and then we'll have a session, some time for some questions about anything going on in the Central Region. And so, Preston, just let me know when you're ready. Okay, so he's going to be just another minute. Just FYI, if you are not getting the monthly newsletter, also send me an email and I'll pop that in the chat here in just a minute. And you will get our monthly newsletter. And that shows all of the meetings in the different states. And of course, some states are not holding meetings. In Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Iowa, there are no in-person meetings. So you are welcome to join our monthly meeting here, and we can discuss state business after our guest speaker. I am planning a field investigator training session in early spring. So, and in person. This will be an in-person event in Kansas City. If you're interested in that, let me know. But also, we have monthly field investigator training sessions. So if you are a certified field investigator, I encourage you to attend those. I am recording them. So if you must miss it, if you can't be there in person, then you can always watch it later. Okay, Preston is good to go. So take your mute off, Preston.
All right.
And
Um,
let me,
Want to make sure we can share screen.
yeah, let's run a little test run on that real quick.
All right. Yeah, it looks like I can. So,
And if you have sound on it, you'll have to check on share sound.
yeah, no, I don't.
You don't. Okay. Good deal. All right. Well, I'll introduce Preston then. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of more than 30 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Several of his books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects and lectures across the United States. He currently resides in an unknown forested location on planet Earth. Don't be so specific, Preston. People might find you. And his website, of course, is prestondennett.weebly.com, and I will put that in the chat. Welcome, Preston.
Very much. Okay, I'll just get started. I do have one question. How long do you want me to go for?
An hour to an hour and a half is
All
our
right.
time allotted.
All right, so you may have to cut me off because I do have a tendency to go long, but that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
So let me just pull up my PowerPoint here and we'll get started. Uh, okay, you should be able to see that.
Yes.
Now let me just get to the slideshow. Let me see here, slideshow from beginning. There we go. All right, can you see that?
Can. Yes.
All right. Well, let's just get started. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity, Margie, and everyone here. I truly appreciate it. Pretty excited about this. I'm going to be talking about my series of books, Not From Here, Volume 5. But before I get into that, let me tell you briefly that I've been involved in this field for about 40 years, came into it as a skeptic, and about a year in, joined MUFON, became a field investigator for about 10 years. I dove deep doing first-hand investigations and reading every book I could find, and wrote about 30 articles. Then in 1996, I put out my first book, UFO Healings, as you can see in the top upper left. And since then, I've been putting out, on the average, a book one per year. These are most of my UFO books. I've done paranormal as well, because as I'm sure you guys all know, these topics are related. So yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've had a lot of my own experiences as well. This is what I'm going to be talking about tonight, the Not From Here series, which started when I realized that a lot of the articles I had written were basically no longer available. This is almost half my research. So I decided to start putting them out in book form. And the theme of these books is really cases which sort of defy the standard model of contact, weird patterns in UFO activity, outlying cases. Uh, it's always been kind of my specialty, I think, to find patterns in ET contact. So that's what these books are about. So a lot of these are quite unusual, unique, or high strangeness, which I think has a lot to say about what's going on here. 5 volumes so far. I'm working on a sixth. So I'm going to be presenting cases, a few from each book. Certainly don't have time to present them all. But as you can see in book one, I covered 10 different topics, all kinds of stuff from conversations with ETs, people who've received phone calls from extraterrestrials. I know how that sounds, but there's quite a few cases. People who've shot at UFOs, alien zoos. I'm going to be talking about UFOs over graveyards, cases where ETs are seen among us, the alien clown connection. Often ETs will appear, particularly in cases with children, dressed up as clowns. So all different types of cases, including cases where UFOs hover over mines. I'll be talking about that. So let's start there. Quite a few cases of UFOs hovering over graveyards. This really shocked me when I found this out, and I was amazed to see how many cases there are. For example, Jim and Coral Lorenzen, pictured there in the upper left, had a case involving a lady who was who owned a funeral parlor, a funeral home. And she had this person who was visiting outside the grave site and came running in and said that there was a UFO hovering outside. The owner did not believe it and just kind of dismissed the account until a few days later, her son came running in and said, "Mom, there's a UFO hovering over the graveyard." So that was my first clue, like, I think there's something really strange going on here. And it turns out a lot of major researchers have cases like this, and they've been published in various magazines and newspaper clippings. That's where I found quite a few of them in some of the data banks like APRO, Newfork, and MUFON. But one really interesting case occurred in Edmonton, Canada, to Ricky Banyard. You can see him pictured here, May 7, 1967. He was outside with his friend when they saw this craft, which you can see drawn there right next to Ricky, hovering over the Edmonton, Canada graveyard. And his friend became frightened, but Ricky stayed outside and watched it for some time until finally it was late. He had to go back inside. The next day, an examination of the graveyard showed some mysterious burned spots among the graves. So it appeared that this object had come quite low, and not only was this a sighting, I guess you would call it a close encounter of the second kind. So there's a number of cases like that. Now, here's a case from Ray Fowler, which occurred in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1964, where he had received a report of a UFO over a graveyard and went with a fellow researcher to sort of stake it out because apparently there was a couple of reports of UFOs coming over this graveyard in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So he's in there in the graveyard with an associate when the police show up and asked him what he's doing. And Ray Fowler explained that there had been reports of recent UFO sightings, very low over this graveyard, and we're hoping to see if anything shows up. And the policeman was very cooperative and said that that sure was interesting because they had recently received a report of a grave being disturbed. And so they were also patrolling this area. And it just gets weirder than that. March 8, 1967, J. Allen Hynek wrote about a case that occurred in Leominster, Massachusetts, involving a young couple who had decided to go out driving after a new snowstorm. They just wanted to check out the newly fallen snow and approached a graveyard in a rural area of Leominster, Massachusetts, and noticed that right over this graveyard, it was covered with what appeared to be smoke or fog, but only in this very localized area, which they thought was quite strange. And as they drove by it, they saw that it was glowing with light. So they turned around and went back to it and parked the car. He got out, and now he could see some sort of metallic object hovering in this glowing, smoky area right above the graveyard. So he reached out and pointed at it, and this is when something really remarkable happened. He says that the second he lifted his arm up, it was thrown back onto the top of his vehicle with incredible force, enough to bruise him. He was completely paralyzed, unable to move, and absolutely, as you can imagine, frightened. And so was his wife. Almost instantly, the UFO lifted up and darted away. The smoke cleared. They were frightened enough. Well, as soon as the UFO left, his paralysis lifted, and he was too frightened to go and inspect the graveyard. They just got back in the car and drove off. So I found like 20 or 30 of cases like this, and what drew my attention to it was a case in Virginia, the Dean Memorial Cemetery, or West Virginia. Reporter Bob Teets wrote a book, UFOs over West Virginia, and I was going through it and came upon this case, the Dean Memorial Cemetery and the Nethkin Cemetery. It's a huge family cemetery, and over the years, people in this area had seen UFOs hovering over these cemeteries, sometimes landing, and it happened so often that they started doing UFO stakeouts because they noticed this pattern. Whenever there was someone newly put into the graves, this was when a UFO would show up. So this was a very widely viewed series of events, and they finally uh, they noticed this pattern that when there was a newly dug grave, this is when the UFOs would show up. So I found cases like this all over the world. One in England involving the UFO, which landed in a graveyard. There was another in France where kids were walking by a graveyard. They saw a landed UFO and started to run towards it when instantly this small little humanoid ran in front of them into the craft, which took off. So there's something going on here. I wrote an article for Fate magazine about this, and they rejected it, which surprised me because they were really publishing a lot of my stuff. I later found out why, because the next issue had an article about UFOs over graveyards, which was written by researcher Scott Corrales, who had also run across this same case, Dean Memorial Cemetery, and uncovered quite a few new ones that I hadn't found. I found some that he hadn't found. But the point is, there's a lot of these cases. And I'm not sure why. My speculation was that perhaps they were harvesting genetic material, which we know can survive for quite some time after death. But Scott Corrales speculated that perhaps they were recovering ET implants. I spoke with a contactee, Dolly Saffron, who I wrote a book about her case, and asked her about it because she's had very extensive contact. She said, yes, that's what they do. They will sometimes come and retrieve not only the implants, but sometimes a person who is perhaps very close to them or related in some way. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about, these weird patterns going on in UFO activity. Now here's another very odd pattern, which sounds so unusual. And this was brought to my attention when I was interviewing a gentleman from upstate New York. I call him Kenneth. He is anonymous. He had a lot of missing time encounters, usually involving these orbs of light which would show up, and then he would have hours of missing time. He ended up moving away from New York down to Florida to try to avoid this, but of course his encounters continued, and they ramped up as he got older. And one day he's driving to meet his friends at a bar when suddenly his cell phone starts ringing, but he had it set on a ringtone that was a song, and it made this very unusual sound that it couldn't make. So he picked it up and it said no such number, and he ignored it. And it kept ringing and ringing, and so finally he answered it, and he said that there was an almost robotic sounding voice. First he heard weird clicks and buzzing sounds and just odd noises. And then it said, "We are coming soon," in a very quick, robotic, almost voice, and repeated it. And then the line went dead. That scared him naturally because it was very odd. He ended up having missing time, went home. That night, he had an encounter, and it was his only fully conscious encounter where he didn't have missing time. And basically, he was brought on board a craft, saw Greys, was shown a young hybrid child. And the Greys said, "This is your child. Isn't this wonderful? Aren't you happy?" He was not happy. He did not like his encounters. They were very frightening for him. And this encounter sent a wave of mixed emotions of anger and fear, disgust at the appearance of the child, but at the same time, he felt an enormous amount of love and empathy towards this child who was his. So ultimately, it was a very difficult experience for him, but not negative necessarily. But yeah, he kept receiving these odd calls every week or so and was never able to figure out where they were coming from until this happened. And that rang a bell for me because I remember that Ray Fowler said that as he was interviewing Betty Andreasson and going under hypnosis sessions, she said she received a call which she believes was the ETs. And they were very angry. She couldn't understand what they were saying other than they seemed incensed that she was going public with her story. And again, she said it sounded like a lot of clicks, buzzing sounds, a lot of consonants, very strange. So I started doing research and I found quite a few cases of this. For example, Bud Hopkins, his star client, Debbie Jordan Caldwell, said that when she was pregnant with her child, every Wednesday she would receive these weird calls. And it was the same sort of thing. This voice speaking this weird alien language with lots of L's and K's and consonants. And she would hang up and they'd call again the next week. It was always Wednesday evenings. And it occurred during the entire duration of her pregnancy. And she never did figure it out. She said that when her son was born, he was, of course, a normal, happy, healthy child. But as a young kid, a very young toddler, he started speaking in that same language and eventually grew out of it. But that kind of freaked her out. And I found a lot of cases like this. Whitley Strieber said that he was listening to his stereo one day in his New York apartment with his wife when suddenly a voice came over the stereo and said, "We are watching you." So he took the stereo apart, could not find anything that would explain how this voice could basically talk to him. He says he actually held a short conversation, but forgot most of it and only remembered that last part. Probably the ultimate case of this kind comes from Jack Sarfati, pictured here, 1952. He was a young boy and started receiving these series of calls from a robotic voice which said this caller was a UFO occupant. And Jack started receiving all this amazing information about astrophysics and astronomy. His mom said that he started talking about all these topics that were well beyond his years. And ultimately, Jack spoke with this alleged UFO occupant who was going to set up a rendezvous, an appointment where he could see the UFO. So he got all his friends together at the appointed time, at the appointed place. Unfortunately, the UFO did not show up. The last call he got, his mom came running up and grabbed the phone out of his hand and said, "Stop calling my son. You're not allowed to do this. Go away," and hung up the phone. And that was the last call. Interestingly, Jack forgot all about this. He did not remember it at all until later his mom reminded him about these calls. So that's kind of an interesting element, which we do see with a lot of close encounter cases, this sort of amnesia. At any rate, what's really interesting about this is Jack Sarfati ended up becoming a quantum physicist. So it appears that there was some influence in that regard. So yeah, I got quite a few cases like this. Nancy Dutertri, I think she called me up and said, "Yeah, that happened to me as well." I've had a number of people say this has happened to them. John Keel talked about it. And I know how unusual this sounds, but I can tell you that it sort of does fit in with the whole idea of electromagnetic disturbances. ETs influence all kinds of machines in odd ways, not just cars stopping and lights going out. But I know of at least 3 cases where people said that they had events like this with their television. One gentleman approached me at a MUFON conference and said, as a young child, the TV came on by itself and he saw an image of what appeared to be the inside of a UFO and gray ETs. And they were turning and looking at him. This freaked him out. He went running up to try to wake his parents. They would not wake up. He looked out the window. There was a UFO hovering over the house. So he was in dead panic for 5 or 10 minutes while this was going on. And finally, the TV went off. The UFO was gone. His parents woke up, and that was it. He asked me, have I ever heard of a case like this? No, I hadn't, but now I've since have. There was another case in New York where a lady was having contact, missing time events, and right before one of her contacts, she's watching TV when the screen fuzzed up and an ET appeared, a gray ET. I know another case in South America, 2 cases actually. So yeah, this is a weird pattern of ET contact that you don't hear a lot about, but I think it absolutely fits in with their ability to contact people in a variety of ways. Some people get telepathic contact, some have a simple sighting, some are taken on board, some see humanoids, but ET contact can happen in a wide variety of ways, including, it appears, a phone call. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about UFOs hovering over mines. This is something I noticed very early on in my research, and I finally did include a chapter in this first book. I did a video about it where I found probably close to 50 cases. The book includes about 20. Perhaps the most dramatic that I could find occurred on October 23rd in 1980 in Morenci, Arizona. This is basically a mining town. Arizona is the United States' leading producer of copper, and there's a lot of copper mines. And I found UFO events almost pretty much the vast majority of these copper mines. And on October 23rd, 1980, these UFOs showed up and hovered directly over the smokestack that you can see pictured there, and dropped down these little orb-like probes into the smokestack. Kind of fits with the idea that ETs are watching our technology and are concerned about our environment. Because as you may know, when people are taken on board, that's one of the messages they will be given about the dangers of pollution and the destruction of our environment and so forth. So it appears they are showing a great interest in mines. There was another case at the Brush Creek mine in Pennsylvania where UFOs showed up. I'm sorry, Brush Creek, California. This is a really, really interesting case because on April 20th, the two miners who were working this mine uh, saw a UFO hovering very low over the mine, John Black and John Van Allen. And they thought it was a one-off. It turned out not to be because on May 20th, the UFOs showed up again, only this time it had landed. And they went over, it took off, they went up to it and found not only the landing impressions, but small little footprints. And in fact, on one of these encounters, they saw this little being described as about 3 feet tall, human looking, but with very pale skin. It was holding a little bucket, very strange bucket, and scooping up water out of the creek there. But it seemed to show interest in this mine. And showed up again on June 20th. So that's 3 months in a row on the very exact same day. They called the police, asked them if it's okay if they shoot at these little critters. The police said, no, it's not. And then on July 20th, this word got out about this series of events. So on July 20th, a crowd of more than 100 people showed up expecting to see this UFO appear again because it had appeared 3 months in a row on the same date. Of course, the UFO did not show up. The Air Force did show intense interest in this case and sent out investigators. They ultimately tried to debunk it, which is interesting because they definitely showed interest in this and documents prove that. So there's a lot of cases of these, some involving humanoids, some involving landings, all different types of mines. Jacques Vallée had a case up at French Gulch in Northern California where a couple owned a gold mine and they had repeated encounters with this UFO once it landed on the road in front of them and basically rushed up to them, and they both had a missing time encounter. It left a pile of mine tailings, or sort of a mixture of elements that were analyzed by Jacques Vallée and found to be not normal sand as it appeared to be, but a variety of different minerals. So many cases. Let me just tell you a couple more. There was another one at Spring Creek Mine in Twin Falls, Idaho, 1965. This case comes from Jim and Coral Lorenzen. There were two men who saw this UFO come down repeatedly, and it was landing over the mine tailings. This is interesting because this is the debris that's left over after all the valuable ores have already been extracted. And so this craft appeared like it was taking what we would consider waste or not useful. So perhaps they were just studying this. Hard to say for sure, but there's no doubt that ETs are showing an interest in mines. I've got cases in Australia, South Africa. There was a case involving a diamond mine where a person saw humanoids. Probably to me the most interesting case of all was what occurred in Karnes City, Texas in 1981 at a uranium mine. The witness is Michael Harvey. He reported this to, I think it was the Jeff Rentz show initially. At any rate, he and several other miners were working this open pit uranium mine By open pit, I mean it's not a tunnel, it's just an open area. And they were digging their way down to this uranium deposit, which had been mapped. And suddenly, this very large craft showed up and it started sending down these pencil thin, pastel colored beams of light, several of them, all over the mine. This upset the workers incredibly. They were very much traumatized. One man actually broke down crying because this was something that was completely out of their world experience. And it was a pretty short encounter, maybe 5 minutes or so. The UFO darted away, and the new crew came to take over. And the old crew who had seen this told them what happened. And the new crew didn't believe them, ridiculed them, gaslit them, and just kind of ignored their story. But the crew who saw this UFO got the last laugh and were vindicated because when they finally did dig down to this uranium deposit, they found out that it had been, uh, I don't know how I would put this, destroyed, altered, spent. The uranium was no longer active. It was just this chalk white dust. So I don't know what exactly is going on here. If the ETs were taking this themselves, I don't think so. I would think that more that this was a message, like this is not wise. This is the wrong course of action. I lean towards that because this is the number one message contactees will get when they're taken on board. Besides, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you. If people get messages, it's almost always the dangers of anything nuclear, nuclear proliferation, nuclear weapons, nuclear power, these sort of things. Very much like what we saw in the 1967 Malmstrom incident in Montana, where the intercontinental ballistic missiles were turned off. So I think that's probably what was going on here. I'm, of course, speculating. But yeah, I don't think ETs need our elements. They certainly have access to the entire universe. So I think this is more of a case of them keeping tabs on our technological development, perhaps. But yeah, a lot of cases like this. Okay, moving on to my second book. Let's see, how's my time? Yeah, I'm definitely going to go over, so please stop me. This second book covers a variety of subjects, including UFO investigators' disease. That's a term coined by Ed Conroy, who studied Whitley Strieber's case, trying to find out if this was a hoax or not, and started having his own encounters. As it turns out, a lot of UFO researchers will start having encounters after they start researching this subject, and that certainly happened to me. Aliens Are Us. It talks about cases where people are brought on board and the ETs explain to them that we share a common ancestry. I did a chapter called The Incredible Shrinking Abductee. Betty Andreasen experienced this event where she saw a man shrunk down to diminutive size after a contact. The ETs called it deopulating. So I found a number of cases where that sort of thing happened. The Mystery of Angel Hair is a study of cases involving this weird substance that is associated with UFO sightings, a very wispy, cotton candy, sort of spiderweb-like substance, which I think is great evidence, and not a lot of people know about it, but here is physical evidence of ET contact. Extraterrestrial gardeners. These are cases where ETs come down and take plants, so it's clear that they are doing a study of our planet. UFO rescue at sea. There's a few cases where people have had incredible encounters while in peril on the ocean. I did a whole study of the smell of UFOs, which was really interesting because they fell into two categories, sort of chemical metallic odors, which like ozone, which indicate that these craft are advanced machines, and of course organic odors. Often people will be taken on board and they smell I mean, Whitley Strieber described it as smelling like a locker room. And I've heard that sort of description a number of times. Or people smelling the ETs directly, which apparently do have a body odor. Another chapter is the UFO breathing pool. These are cases where people are put under, it's not water so much, it's what appears to be a super oxygenated liquid of some kind because they're told to breathe this liquid. It causes, generally speaking, a lot of fear and panic, but then they start breathing this liquid and discover that they can breathe. The reasons for it are not fully known, but my research shows that it's probably health related. And there's cases involving alien drinks where people are taken on board and given something to drink. Cases of that are really consistent. And of course, cases involving UFOs and rockets. Uh, and a huge number of cases where UFOs will show up during rocket launches. So it does appear that they're keeping tabs on our technology to an incredible degree, because I have 3 cases, and this is just amazing to me, where UFOs showed up when people were launching toy rockets, little toy rockets. So yeah, this is how closely they're keeping tabs on us. So let's take a look at a couple of these. Like the mystery of angel hair. I got interested in this when I was writing UFOs over California, a book about the history of California sightings, and ran across a case which occurred in the San Fernando Valley where I lived at that time on November 16, 1953, when 3 spherical UFOs darted across the sky. It was very widely viewed and dropped volumes of angel hair. I later spoke with a first-hand witness who was there at the very spot. I described how a bakery truck had been covered with this angel hair-like substance. She said, that was my dad. This was our house where this fell onto. It was actually just a few blocks from where I lived in Reseda at one point. And government folks showed up and scooped up this angel hair. Almost always, this substance will sublime or dissipate, disintegrate very quickly. So it's quite rare that anyone's able to gather a sample, but it does happen. For example, there was a case at the Jerome Elementary School, right here lower left, Marysville, Ohio, October 22nd, 1954. I did a whole book about schoolyard UFO encounters, and this is one of my favorite, also one of my favorite angel hair cases, because all these students, about 50 or 60 of them, were out on the playground when a couple of UFOs showed up and started darting around at just maybe under 1,000 feet of altitude, which is actually pretty high for these schoolyard encounters, which are generally very low level. But they're darting around, putting on what's clearly a display, wanting to be seen. And one of the kids had the presence of mind to run in and get a teacher, got the principal actually, and he came running out and he saw it too. So this is not just kids seeing this. He ran in to get another adult, and they ran out together. Just at that point, the UFOs had just left, and they sent down huge volumes of this angel hair and covered the entire playground, draped over the fences. In fact, it covered a mile around the school, and it was so thick that it was draping over telephone wires, creating like a corridor over this one road, over trees, and so forth. This generated a lot of interest from local UFO researchers. I think Leonard Stringfield took a very close look at this case. But what was really interesting is the principal did gather some of the substance because there was so much of it, it didn't disintegrate, as it almost always does. And he rolled it up, and became this gelatinous ball. It turned his hands green. That very much concerned him, so he quickly ran and washed his hands, but did gather a sample and sent it off to the local Air Force Base, Lockbourne Air Force Base. And they promised to get back to him, but never did, and refused all inquiries. Though later, there was a gentleman who said that he was in a UFO study group at the Pentagon, and that this was the one case that they considered very credible and could not figure out. So that's an incredible case. And what's amazing to me is it was 1 year later and 5 days when almost the same exact event occurred at Whitsett Elementary School in North Carolina. That's pictured right here. Here are the witnesses and the teacher who saw it. There were about 60 kids on the playground when several UFOs showed up and again put on what appeared to be a display, wanting to be seen, and sent down huge volumes of angel hair, so thick it covered the entire playground. And residents outside of the school saw it as well. The UFOs darted off. The principal collected some of this material. He saw one kid coming down to put it in his mouth and rushed up to him to stop him. Didn't get there in time. This kid actually ate some of this angel hair, or tasted it, I should say. He spit it out. He said it was bitter and salty. So yeah, this is, well, sorry about that. We got a big dog. Uh, so he spit the angel hair. It was bitter and salty, and took this sample and sent it off to Burlington Scientific Labs for study. They were not able to identify it. They had no idea what this was. And they said, we think it might be spider webs. You should send it to a biologist. They might be able to figure it out. So he did. And the biologist, they thought it might be spider webs. And he sent it to the biologist, and the biologist said, there's no way this is spider webs. It's completely different. Even if it was spider webs, you would have seen huge numbers of spiders if the amount of angel hair you're describing is accurate, which of course it was because it covered the entire playground. So he still had that sample when someone stole it. It was shortly after that. His house was broken into and it was nothing else was stolen, just that. It was shortly later that an Air Force officer showed up and tried to tell him that what he and all the students saw was a temperature inversion. What this officer didn't realize is who he was talking to. This was a World War II pilot with hundreds of hours of pilot experience, flying hours, and trained in aircraft recognition. So they had it out. They had a big knockdown, drag out argument because there was no way he was going to allow this officer to debunk what he'd seen because he was perfectly aware that what he had seen was unconventional aircraft. A lot of cases of this kind. I mean, hundreds. Ultimately, it's rare in terms of the fact that we have a million encounters more documented all over the world. So there's several hundred, yes. So uh, ultimately, kind of rare. There was a really important case which took place on October 27, 1954, over a soccer match in Florence, Italy, where two UFOs showed up and darted around over the stadium. Another clear example of a UFO display with these objects wanting to be seen, and dropped volumes of angel hair, which were studied in a laboratory setting. As has happened a number of times, they've been found to contain some really interesting elements. To me, the most interesting one, metallic elements. One was boron, which shouldn't be naturally flying down out of the sky. But boron is one element that's used in nuclear reactors to protect people from nuclear radiation. So I don't know what that means, what that connection is. But there was another very famous case in Gaelic France over this Oloron school, which again involved huge volumes of this angel hair. And it's many historical cases as well, reaching back hundreds of years, which weren't perhaps necessarily identified as being UFO related because the idea of extraterrestrials wasn't really popularized until the modern age of UFOs. But there was, of course, the very famous Fatima incident on August 13, 1917, in Fatima, Portugal, where these bright lights showed up. And if you look at the eyewitness accounts, some people do describe metallic craft and this sort of substance coming down, which sounds very much like angel hair. So there's a lot of speculation about what this is. Some have said, oh, perhaps it's exhaust. Don't think so, because no UFOs really have exhaust ports or anything like this. And having spoken with a number of contactees, from what I understand, what we're looking at is a substance that is related to or is formed by an interaction of the plasma fields, the very high temperature, high energy plasma fields surrounding UFO craft interacting with the pollutants or elements in our atmosphere. So hard to say for sure, but that's my current assessment. So yeah, that's angel hair. All right, moving on. I just want to talk really briefly about one case which I found super interesting involving a rescue at sea where a family had joined a regatta off of the coast of New Zealand and along with hundreds of boats when a freak storm showed up and there was almost 100-foot waves. Boat after boat was being swamped or sunk, and all their EPIRBs, these are emergency beacons, were going off at once. So the rescuers were not able to target any one particular person who was having the stress because there were so many of these beacons going off at once. And one family had a boat called the Ramtha, and their boat had been swamped and was sinking quickly. And they could see the rescue ship off in the distance and were in radio contact, but the rescuers could not pinpoint their location. Then suddenly, this huge ball of light appeared right over them. This does not appear to be St. Elmo's fire, which is sort of a magnetic, sort of ball lightning-ish type of natural phenomena, because this was much larger and it was staying there. And the rescue ship said, "Did anyone just light off a flare? We see a bright light." And the crew of the Ramtha said, "No, we didn't, but that's us. It's right over our boat." And so the rescuers went straight to this location and were able to pick up this family. And literally 1 hour after they pulled them on board, the boat sunk. And there was an interesting denouement to this case because there was another boat which had been swamped, and the family had lost, they had put their entire life savings into it. And it didn't look like they weren't insured, apparently. And another UFO appeared over this boat, and someone went and found this swamped boat and was able to drag it to port, and the family was able to recover their boat. So it's kind of a double thing going on here. But I found a number of cases like this. I've got a bunch of cases where people have been rescued of all kinds of things, from drowning to falls to weather events to assault, uh, car accidents, you name it. So pretty interesting stuff. All right, let's talk a little bit about alien drinks. This is a somewhat rare event when people are taken on board a craft, but it's definitely consistent. And I started doing a study of this because it was really interesting to see the commonalities between these cases. For example, there was a case in the UK, Oxfordshire, UK, involving a whole family who was taken on board on June 19, 1978. They ended up writing a book about their incident called the Janus People. And it was a fairly typical onboard experience where they were given messages, examined, given a tour of the craft, and so forth, and then let go. Now, they all had missing time except for the youngest child who remembered and kept telling them, "We were just on a spaceship." And they thought, oh, how cute. The child has got a great imagination, until they found out that they had had missing time. And under hypnosis, recalled all of this. Now, what's really interesting is as they were being let go, they were each given a drink, which they described as a sort of a bitter, milky white substance. And it's their belief that this was given to them to sort of help them to forget or their encounter. And they didn't give it to the youngest child, and she was the only one who consciously remembered it. So that could be one of the purposes for this. Whitley Strieber talked about having this same exact drink and described it in exactly the same way. He said it was a bitter, milky white substance, which was quite unpleasant. I interviewed one gentleman who was taken on board as a young child with his father, and he was told to eat this sort of, looked like a cookie to him. It ended up being very bitter and tasted almost like tar. And there was a drink that they gave him, and he blacked out instantly and found himself on an examination table being examined. There was one case from Jacques Vallée involving a contactee by the name of Jose Antonio. This occurred in 1969, Brazil. Again, a fairly extensive contact where he was examined, shown images of future disasters and things like this. And they gave him this cup, which was he said almost like made out of stone, but with an inverted pyramid inside, and had him drink this liquid, which he described as neon green, and was not particularly pleasant tasting, though they later gave him a sort of fruit drink. He believes the first one was medicinal and the other one was nutrition. So yeah, a lot of cases like this. It's, again, pretty darn common. There was another case involving a lady by the name of Donna Butts, who was taken on board a craft in Kansas, and they gave her this neon green liquid. And she says that after they gave it to her, it improved her eyesight. So perhaps there is something medicinal to this. A lot of contactees describe this, and often they will describe it as having very bright colors. What's really interesting is in 2022, I had my own fully conscious onboard UFO encounter. This was as a result, I think, of working closely with a contactee by the name of Dolly Safran, who I wrote a full-length book about her case called Symmetry. And I ended up being taken on board her craft and met her main ET liaison, a very tall gray who she calls Mama. And absolutely, this was a wonderful experience for me. I was very briefly examined by what looked to me like a hybrid ET with a white suit and curly blonde hair and very large eyes. I saw other grays. I saw this very tall gray, 7 feet tall. She was very kind. And I walked up to her and she said, "So, is this what you thought it would be like?" And I said, "No, it's much better," because it was. I felt like I was among friends, people who were very evolved. Long story short, I saw the earth down below. I saw other people there. Towards the end of the experience, she called me over and gave me this drink, which was in a little glass tumbler, a very thick glass, and it was this bright glow, almost glowing green liquid. And I lifted it up and I sniffed it. I couldn't smell anything, and I took a sip. It was very thick, kind of like cough syrup. And I did taste it. It had a very mild taste of, the best way I could describe it is sort of kiwi or lime, but very mild. And she started to take it away from me after I took a first sip. I'm like, "Wait, you said this was mine. I'd like to take another sip if that's okay." And they said, "Yes, that's fine," but kind of gave me a surprised look. Like, why would I want to do that? I did take another sip and I blacked out. I later asked Dolly Saffron about that. I'm like, "What's up with these drinks? And I've done a study of it. What are they for?" And she said, "Well, the one you were given is medicinal. When a person is taken on board, they run some danger of radiation exposure, and this helps to ameliorate that." So yeah, those are alien drinks. And I had the experience, so I thought that was really cool. Okay, where am I at? Okay, still got some time. Book 3, I covered a bunch of cases. One chapter is all about people who've been taken on board, but as in the vast majority of cases are not viewed by outside witnesses, but some are. So I covered a bunch of cases where people have actually seen other people getting taken on board. Chapter 2 is about people who've lost their job as a result of either seeing a UFO, going public with their experience, or even investigating the subject. Like John Mack, he very nearly lost his job as a Harvard professor. Alien gifts, people who were given ET artifacts. I know of several cases where people have tried to take something from a UFO and were not successful. You're much more likely to get something if you ask them. And there's been a number of cases like this, which usually involve perhaps crystals or vegetation of some kind or metal fragments, this sort of thing. Another is to err is alien. This involves cases of people who were put uh, in locations that were different from where they were taken. Like one case I investigated, two men were driving and they were put back in different seats. Or people are put back in the wrong bed, or they're put back outside their house, or even miles away, or with someone else's clothes on, or their clothes are on backwards. So the question is this a mistake, or is this intentional? Are the ETs doing this to sort of let a person know that they have had contact? It's sort of an undeniable evidence. I don't know for sure, but I explore that. Uh, Cases where people contact UFOs using a Ouija board, which sounds crazy, but I've got a number of cases of this. UFOs over prisons. Again, that fits the pattern of ETs keeping tabs of our technology. They seem to show an interest in any kind of technological installations. I did a study of cases where people claim to have seen what they believe to be religious figures on board UFOs. Exceedingly rare, almost statistically insignificant, but it does happen. I explored the Bigfoot UFO connection because there's a number of cases where people have seen UFOs or ETs and Bigfoot at the same time. I'll see a UFO and a Bigfoot shows up, or Bigfoot goes on board a UFO or comes out, or something along these lines. So there's maybe 100, 200 cases. So again, compared to the millions of documented cases, not a direct, absolute, undeniable connection, but well, I'll back up there. It's an undeniable connection, but it's exceedingly rare. I did a whole chapter on the so-called anal probe, which has been the butt of so many jokes in this field. And after scouring the literature, I literally found maybe 20 cases of this. So it's not super common, but appears to be a simple colonoscopy. So I just thought it was important to cover that because it gets so much attention. And the final chapter is people who've been taken down to the engine room of a UFO and told how it works, and perhaps even given instructions. So let's take a look at a couple of these. I found this really interesting case from uh, Utah, Roosevelt Hospital. Frank Salisbury wrote this book called The Utah UFO Display, and he was the first to really recognize the fact that sometimes UFOs are showing themselves intentionally to people. And he wrote this book about all these UFO encounters in the Wichita Basin of Utah. This is real close to the Skinwalker Ranch, by the way. But in many of these cases, UFOs were clearly showing themselves on purpose. There was one really interesting case where these kids were playing around with the Ouija board, and the intelligence behind the Ouija board claimed to be ET and said that they would prove it in a certain location and certain time. So the kids were all excited and were getting ready for it. And their mom said, you know, when the time arrived, they said, you better go outside because your quote UFO is supposed to show up in a few minutes. And they ran outside, and sure enough, it did, right over the Roosevelt Hospital, a very bright sphere of light. So this was essentially predicted. And what's so amazing is that they were not the only witnesses. A number of people in the area saw this. And that intrigued me because I found a number of cases that were similar to this. In fact, contactee Sisto Paz Wells, very well-known contactee who started a group called Rama and very successfully called down UFOs for the press, for the media on numerous occasions. I was able to speak with him. He's an absolutely genuine contactee, in my humble opinion. But he initially contacted UFOs through the process of automatic writing, which is essentially the same thing as a Ouija board. There was another case involving automatic writing in Australia. This case I was just looked into where a couple had successfully used automatic writing to predict certain events. And as they were doing it once, the intelligence behind it said, we are ETs. You can call us the sky people. And they said, well, we want to see you, prove that you are actually who you say you are. And the intelligence finally agreed to it and sent them to a location near their home. And sure enough, they got to the edge of this lake where the ETs or sky people said to go. And they saw this very tall, 7-foot tall figure. It quite frightened them, which the ET actually warned them and said, we generally don't show ourselves to people because they become very frightened. They later had a repeat encounter, so this was not just a one-off. Yeah, I found a number of cases like this. Gary Valtenuta wrote a whole story about his contact with an ET through a Ouija board. Perhaps one of the most interesting cases that I could find occurred in the summer of 1984 in Burgos, Spain, where a family was on vacation and was playing with the Ouija board, and they started talking to an entity who called himself M4 and said that it would appear for them. And the Ouija board said, go to this location at this time, and they did, and they saw this glowing entity standing on the beach, and were actually able to take a photograph of it, which you can see here. It's certainly not a great photograph, but when you combine it with the eyewitness testimony and the fact that these people were willing to go on record with their real names and say that this did happen to him, is a pretty impressive testimony. So yeah, I found a number of cases like this. I certainly don't recommend using the Ouija board because as a ghost researcher, I've interviewed a number of people who've played around with Ouija boards and ended up having a really horrific demonic haunting. But it certainly does fit in with the fact that ETs are very telepathic, perhaps, or are able to communicate with people in a variety of ways. And as I mentioned earlier, contact happens in so many different ways, and this is one of them. I put this out and I got a lot of feedback from it. It's quite controversial, but I think it's important to note that, yeah, this can happen and has happened. Another really interesting series of encounters I investigated are UFOs over prisons. Found a lot of cases of this. And what's really interesting about these cases is that it's not just sightings, but sometimes close encounters of the second kind. For example, I believe it was the South Boise Correctional Complex where a guard saw these UFOs and went to his walkie-talkie to call attention to it, and it wouldn't work. He ended up having to go to a landline and call the prison that way and bring attention to this object, which by then was gone. So I found cases like this all over the world, some involving humanoids as well, or landings outside the prison. I spoke with one gentleman in France, actually, who was jailed as a result of using marijuana. And he says, taken from his prison cell onto a UFO, physically examined, and they put him back in the prison cell, which was unfortunate for him because if they can take him out, it would have been an amazing jailbreak, but that didn't happen. Found a few cases of that as well. There was one where a person was missing from their cell and people were the guards were going crazy trying to find him, and they found him back in the cell and had no idea how he had gotten out. Probably the most impressive case of this kind is the one at the state penitentiary at Canyon City in Colorado, because I found three separate cases where UFOs were hovering over the prison. One involved two guards who were in the guard tower and saw this object fairly off in the distance, but right next to the prison. And following this incident, the guard had some weird physiological effects. He was very dizzy, he wasn't able to sleep, he had extreme thirst, all kinds of weird stuff, which you generally see with people who have been taken on board or had some sort of direct contact. But there was another case where the UFOs showed up in large numbers. The nearby Air Force Base scrambled jets to chase after them. It was viewed by dozens of police officers. These UFOs put on a complete display. So quite a few of these cases where UFOs have been seen over prisons, not only seen by the guards, but by the prisoners themselves. All right, this is another very interesting aspect of UFO encounters, which I call If You Build It. These are cases where people are taken to the engine room and explained how these craft are powered or how they work, essentially. And some of these people have been given very specific instructions on perhaps how to build an anti-gravity machine or a free energy motor. For example, one gentleman, Virgil Atkinson, I found his case on, I think it was Newfork or MUFON. At any rate, he explained how he had an encounter while driving along the Pacific Coast Highway and picked up what he thought were two hitchhikers, young sailors, but they looked identical. They were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, kind of enigmatic in their speech. And they said, you can drop us off here. He dropped them off, and immediately a UFO showed up and hovered very low over his car. Oh yeah, the young men told him that he would be shipped to Oregon at a newly constructed Air Force Base, which at that time had not even been publicly revealed. Sure enough, it turned out to be true. He was taken up there. He had an onboard experience and he was taken to the engine room and they showed him this free energy device and explained in detail how it worked. And he ended up filing this patent, which you can see here, which is a design of an oscillation-driven vehicle. So this is incredible, but it's not unique because Yvonne Smith, very well-known researcher, one of the leading onboard UFO researchers, has worked with hundreds of people who've had direct contact and missing time. One of her clients is John and Jesse Long, twins. There's a weird twin connection. I covered that in one of these books. At any rate, John Long has a high school education, but he suddenly became very interested in magnetics, electronics, mechanical engineering, to the point where he became obsessed with it and started educating himself and ended up filing some patents with these, quote, energy-free motors. As you can see here, here are two of the patents, which I looked up. You can look these up. An ellipsoid generator in one, and another a magnetically coupled dangling apparatus. It's really interesting because after he filed some of these patents, there are multiple of them, he was visited by the NSA, who showed great interest in his patent and asked him where he got this information. He told them, and they said, do not speak about this to anyone. We may have to actually put this under top secret classification, and everyone you spoke to, we need to know about because we're going to have to talk to them too. So what he ended up doing was filing separate patents, sort of what he called backdooring this, and not putting it together into one invention, but rather two, which apparently avoided this being classified as top secret. But definitely an interesting case. Whitley Strieber himself described how, as a very young boy, he became interested in counter-rotating magnets and building a machine involving this, and ended up burning down a whole wing of his house. And covered a few other cases, like another farmer who had this same experience and was building this machine in his barn involving counter-rotating magnets, finally finished it, turned it on, and as soon as he did, every metallic object in the barn was immediately drawn directly into this machine, causing it to explode, and that ended his experiment. So this is, Jacques Vallée had a case involving a young lady who absolutely felt that she could build this motor if she had just could get the materials for this. I know of a number of cases like this. I keep running into them. Probably my favorite involves a gentleman by the name of Jim Kubelbeck, who I interviewed personally. His case is in my book, Inside UFOs. In 1960, he was on board the USS Valley Forge uh, and had an encounter. He was called up on deck by a fellow shipmate, and about 10 or 20 of them stood on the deck and saw these glowing objects pretty far away off on the horizon. They were pulsating. He ran down, opened his locker, and got his binoculars, which he had bought offshore. Everyone down in the room there said, Jim probably bought some rocks, because a bunch of people had bought uh, things offshore and were ripped off and ended up opening their packages and found out it was just rocks. But he pulled out this brand new pair of binoculars and said, "Hey, come follow me up on deck. There's UFOs." Only a few did. But he and his fellow shipmates watched these UFOs for about an hour. He went back down and called the what do you call it, the control room. And they said they denied it at first, said, "We don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing there. Go away," which was ridiculous. He ended up calling them again, and they said, "We're damn busy here. We'll have to talk to you later." And shortly after that, the ship turned and moved away from these objects, which disappeared. And that seemed to be that. However, the next day, he started talking to his shipmates, and none of them remembered it. In fact, when he pulled out his binoculars again in the box, they started joking, you probably bought a bunch of rocks. And he's like, "What are you talking about? You saw me open this yesterday." They did not remember. He asked every single person he found two who did remember it. They're like, "Oh yeah," they had forgotten until he reminded them. But what was really interesting is that night he said he had a quote dream. He does not think it's a dream. He believes he was contacted. He found himself in this room with human-looking people dressed in jumpsuits. And he was very much worried he was AWOL. And they said, "No, no one will miss you. We need to show you something." He's an electronics engineer, so a very intelligent guy. And they took him to this sort of engine room and showed him this device, which really intrigued him because there was no cords, it wasn't attached to anything. And they gave him this big, long lecture about power sources and the history of power use on our planet, all the way from coal and uh, using fire and steam and solar power and so forth, and told him that there are other energy sources you are not aware of, and you need to start looking into this, and you have the knowledge to build something like this. And it's a long, drawn out conversation he had with them about all of this, but that's essentially it in a nutshell. And he had this, quote, dream, but he wrote it down in such detail. He says, "This is not a dream." And he later spoke with a couple of his shipmates who remembered the sighting. And one of them, as they were leaving ship, and said, "I do remember that sighting. I had a really weird dream that night." He didn't have the presence of mind to ask him about that. And he since did try to contact them, but one had died and the other had become so old he was alcoholic and had some level of dementia. so he wasn't able to verify it. Still in touch with this guy, but he said years later, he kept thinking about this and he finally told his family what had happened, and they encouraged him to try to build something along these lines. So that inspired him to give it a try. And he said all these things that he bought were available in any hardware store, and it include magnets. He was very embarrassed. It was like pulling teeth to try to get this story out of him. But a bunch of magnets, he said a bike wheel, some gears and stuff, and he ended up building this sort of perpetual motion device. He said once he got it going, that bike wheel spun for 2 months with just one push. And I tried to get more information out of it, but he clammed up and doesn't want to talk about it. But it's another example of this sort of thing. And I keep finding new ones. So that's that. All right, is my time good? All right. Again, stop me if you need to.
At 12 minutes, Preston.
All right. Do you want to do a Q&A instead, or do you want me to just keep going?
Um, yeah, let's do a Q&A.
All right. I'll just real quickly cover um, some of the cases here. UFO car lift cases. People are taken, their cars lifted up and set down. They're not necessarily taken on board. 4th of July, most common day to see a UFO. Cases where people have crashed into an object. UFOs are hovering, landing at airports. Humanoids are being seen. It's a thing for sure. A weird ET fertilizer connection. Cases where people have levitated physically as a result of an encounter. Happened to Stephen Greer. Bud Hopkins has cases. Jacques Vallée had a case. People who have punched grays in the face during their encounters. Sometimes it can get hostile. Extraterrestrial hitchhikers, number of cases where people have picked up what appear not to be humans. UFOs over dams, I'm sorry. Uh, Cases of world leaders who've seen UFOs. And the last book, cases involving hundreds of objects, people who've called down UFOs, a long list of famous astronomers who've seen UFOs, ETs showing up at UFO conferences, how UFOs are portrayed on the American sitcom, the twin connection. There's a high incidence of twins in the contactee population, a study of names that people have said ETs have told them, warnings such as nuclear proliferation, pollution, destruction of the environment, and so on. Cases where ETs took a person's dog on board with them, and cases involving alien books. So here, let me stop sharing the screen here. And how do I do that? Let me see. Hold on. I see it right here. Boom.
All right, everybody can go ahead and show your video if you want. If you have any questions, just click on the raise hand down there at the bottom, if you would. And if you have any questions for Dennett, let us know. I have a question. Dennett, how long does it take you to do one book?
Yeah. First name Preston, by the way. I know I have two last names. It takes, it depends. Something like this, I can get done probably in 6 months because I've already done a lot of the research for it in terms of having written an article. But each one of these has been updated. So generally speaking, it takes me easily a year to do a book. But the research that's the hardest part. Once I've got all the research done, I can put it together pretty quickly. I'm a very fast typist, so uh, it depends. Yeah.
Mhm. And also, you mentioned that when you were on craft, you got details, you saw things, you experienced things. Was it to you your physical body or your astral body, or what do you think actually transpired?
Physical body. I've had a lot of experience with astral projection. I wrote a book on my own experiences, and I certainly am very, very interested in that. But no, I believe it was the physical body having, walked around and tasted the liquid, and
Hmm.
there was because an astral projection experience has a certain quality to it. And having interviewed a lot of people who had encounters or missing time, they're not in their room, and people are looking for them. I mean, there was one guy I interviewed in Louisiana who was supposed to bale hay with his father and brother, and they were furious with him because he was supposed to be sitting on the hay baler, and he was, and he had missing time. And they're like, no, we looked around for an hour, you were not there. Uh, and many, many cases like that where people, for example, one lady um, approached her son and said, where were you last night? I went into your room and you were not there. And he told her, well, I had this thing where I was taken on board. And she told him, always remember this, don't talk about it. But he was missing from his room. So, yeah, I think by and large, these are almost always physical experiences, and I certainly feel mine was.
Also, do you find that you're having missing time episodes on a more frequent basis?
No, I wouldn't say that that's the case. I definitely did have one major missing time incident in 1992 when a UFO, or I should say an orb, appeared in front of my car in Woodland Hills, California. And I stopped because this thing was hovering right in front of my windshield. And then it darted off, and that's all I remember. In fact, I forgot the whole incident for a couple of months. And suddenly I remembered that. Because normally you see something, you tell everybody, you write it down. I was right next to my brother's house. I would have turned around and told him, but I don't even remember driving home. I don't remember really anything about that. That's the only missing time incident that I can really, oh, there was another when I was a young boy. But no, I have not had an increase in that, no.
Okay. Carl, you have a question.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of your witnesses talked about perpetual energy, that type of theory that they were revealing to us. How come it hasn't gotten out more? I mean, why are we still depending on petroleum?
Um, Great question. And it's infuriating to me because what we're dealing with is a cover up that that is one of the driving forces behind it, because I think we do have this technology and it's being suppressed. And we can see this over and over again throughout human history. For example, the electric car, if you look into the history of electric cars, that was suppressed by the oil industry. And if you look into the history of so-called anti-gravity, uh, people have lost their lives over going public with these sort of things. So I think what we're looking at is a very well-funded, vicious, carefully orchestrated cover-up of technology, and that, let's face it, we have an oil-based economy. Uh, the energy industry makes billions of dollars off of this. And I think the pharmaceutical industry also makes billions of dollars. We know it does, and that they have healing technology which is being suppressed because it's become a business. So these are the people who are on my naughty list: the pharmaceutical industry, the energy industry, the insurance industry, the banking industry. I think these are the folks behind the cover up. And that, yes, many people have tried to get this information out, but it's very dangerous and they'll get scooped up. I mean, there was a guy, I saw this on Dateline, who had invented a fire retardant, which you could coat an egg with it. This is very well verified on a Dateline episode where they took a blowtorch and the egg would not even heat up. And he said he had offers from the airline industry, from the housing industry. Never heard again from it. And still houses are burning down and there's these gigantic wildfires. And there's apparently technology to, prevent houses from being burned down. And he was a hairdresser and hinted that it was a combination of baby powder and a few other things. But no, you don't hear about this. Technology is being suppressed. What we see in the public arena is far behind what the military has, and particularly the military industrial complex. I think we do have this technology. It's being suppressed.
Got a question from the chat from John. While on a craft, Did you feel more or less gravity or any other environmental differences?
The temperature was very mild and comfortable. The gravity was slightly less if I had to pin it down. It felt close to normal, but no, slightly less. I didn't smell anything unusual. The lighting, of course, as people described, was completely indirect. There was no lamps or lights. It was just very well lit, very clean. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
And a question from Kristen, have you experienced contact using meditation as a channel?
Have I? Well, to a limited extent. There was a time where I was very much interested in finding out who the Greys were, because people are basically reporting having uh, children with the Greys. I thought, well, gosh, how can that be? What is their relationship to us? Some of these guys look just like us. And this just became a question I was very curious about when I had what I think contactees call a download. And had just laid down in bed. I wasn't asleep. I was just kind of meditating on this question when I had, yeah, one of these downloads. And I felt like this was direct communication with ET. That they answered the question, and basically what they showed me was a human-looking face, and then another image of the same man, essentially, but he started to lose his hair, and his facial features started to become smaller, and the message, it kind of just flipped through like a deck of cards, showing a person becoming less human and more gray uh, as a result of what I perceived to be radiation. So the message was that Greys are human and have the same genetics as us, which is certainly what a lot of contactees have been told. We are you, you are us, we are one. This sort of, we share a common ancestry. So that was one. I did have some sightings involving telepathic communication, but generally no. I mean, one time I saw a UFO and it basically told me a very personal message, which was that my niece had just been born, which turned out, of course, she was. So that was really cool and surprising, but no channeling.
I've got a question for everybody. Did anybody else just experience something odd with time? Because I looked down at the time and it said 1:38, and then I just looked back, it said 1:30. So if anybody else did, let me know. Okay, any other questions for Preston before we wrap things up?
Hey,
All right.
Margie, Ken Jordan in Texas.
Yes.
Preston, I can't find my little hand thing to ask a question, but Preston, every time I watch your presentations, I learn something more. You're an incredible researcher, and we appreciate you a lot. But I have a question for you is, whenever I give a presentation, I always tell the audience, don't believe a thing I say until you check me out and check my sources. You have so many research projects. How do you go about checking your sources? What's your secret?
Oh, yeah, well, I absolutely 100% agree with you. I really encourage people to do their due diligence and follow up on uh, anything I would say. All these books are fully sourced with footnotes, so you can go to the case and I show the source where I got each and every one of these cases, some of which were certainly personally uh, researched from the individual that I interviewed, but which come from a wide variety of sources. So definitely, it's a lot of work, and it's funny because I had to work full time for most of my life to all this. So this was something I did on weeknights and weekends for most of my life. Really, it's only until recently that I'm doing this full time. But I've got a room full of books, a room full of newspaper clippings and articles and magazines and journals. So, and you network with other researchers. So it's a labor of love and takes an enormous amount of time and
It
energy.
is, and you're right. The doing a background investigation on your source usually takes more time than doing the actual research of what it is you're looking into. So, thank you so
Exactly.
much for everything. And Margie, thank you for letting me and our Texas FIs set in on your training, and thank you, Texas FIs, the ones who did come and set in. You're better off and more informed than you were before you heard Preston. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Susan has her hand up. Susan, go ahead.
Preston, what an incredible, unbelievably awesome body of work you have. Kudos. My question is simply, what does a download feel like?
Um, that's a good question. Uh, it feels like talking to somebody. It's a little bit different because it's very quick and sudden. So suddenly it's like it's I'm not sure there's really words for it. It's like having a bunch of information thrown at you at once, and then you have to kind of sit back and peel the layers of the onion bit by bit, because it's almost overwhelming. It's a lot of information coming at once. So it it took me aback kind of a bit, and certainly I've had other people describe that because their communication is so direct and so quick. So it's like watching a movie on high speed, sort of. And then you have,
Yes,
I think that's the best way I can describe it.
thank you. My little brother describes something that he thinks he may have gotten a download, and the only corroboration would be that the things he and I talked about after that were sort of, you mentioned this earlier, we're at a much higher level than I would have thought this young man would be talking at. And he works full time. So where would he have had time to do all that research? But yet he suddenly has all of this information. So I don't know if he even realizes it happened. Could have happened when he was sleeping, I suppose. But he seems to be imbued with a lot of additional knowledge, mostly about, I'm going to say, astronomical things. Yeah.
Antonio talked about that. He was 7 years old, had a contact, and now he's a
Yep.
very famous astronomer. You see that over and
Yeah.
over again. People become quantum physicists, astronomers,
Yes.
mathematicians,
It's
all kinds of
amazing.
stuff. Yeah. Doctors.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Preston. That was absolutely fantastic, as usual. And I'll be in touch with you about doing another podcast pretty soon.
Wonderful. Yeah. Sorry about the confusion in the beginning. So,
That's okay. You made it. So that was good. All right. So for the next few minutes, I'll just open this up to um, everybody. If you have any questions about the Central Region or MUFON in general, or uh, sighting reports, whatever you'd like to discuss, just go ahead and join in. Anything happening in your area? Are you having a lot of UFO sightings in your area? I know we are. I know Oklahoma is having quite a few right now. Carl, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Just amazing. All of a sudden, it was a flurry of reports for Oklahoma. And also, I was trying to get into, you might want to mention about Mr. McDonald and Debbie's role now. I don't know if everyone knows that.
Yeah, there have been several announcements made, but after Dave McDonald's death, unfortunately, he has been a great asset to MUFON, and nobody expected it. But Debbie Ziegelmeyer is now the executive director for MUFON, And so she is no longer the state director for Missouri because being executive director is enough for her. So I am now the state director for Missouri, and Mel Van Vickel is the assistant state director. As the Central Region director, we have some. Unfortunately, we lost Greg Anderson recently in Iowa, so I've taken over as the state director for Iowa. Carl is helping me out as ASD for Iowa, and these are interim positions. Also, I'm the state director for South Dakota and Oklahoma. And so Carl has graciously taken on the unofficial role as chief investigator for the Central Region states that don't have investigators. And he is doing quite a few investigations. And then also the field investigator trainees are learning from Carl. So thank you so much for taking that role, Carl. I appreciate it. Can always use help. We also, for the newsletter, for those of you who are writers, we're always looking for articles. And it doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't have to just be in the Central Region. But if you've had some really good reports, investigations, preferably with photos or drawings, and would like to have that included in the newsletter, just let me know about it. I'd be glad to include that. And if you're not getting the newsletter, again, send me an email. You don't have to live in the Central Region to get it. It's and there's no charge.
Margie K.
Yes, Ken.
My hand's up.
Yeah, I see that.
Have y'all in the RD community heard anything about who might be replacing CJ in Southwest Region? Anything come out yet in your area?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you for coming. All right. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, then we will wrap this one up and watch for the meeting information for next month. I'll see you next month.